bustling city of Florence, where art was both a trade and a calling, Giovanni Bellomonte's name was yet to be known. The streets echoed with tales of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, leaving little room for those who had yet to prove their genius. Giovanni, a gaunt man in his late 30s with hollow cheeks and eyes that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, stood in the shadow of such greats, striving for recognition. He worked tirelessly in a crumbling studio on the edge of the Arno River. His canvases, stretched taut and pale as ghosts, bore witness to countless failed attempts. Despite meticulous brushwork and compositions planned to the finest detail, his works lacked something indefinable but essential: soul. Patrons would stop by, murmur polite words, and then shuffle away, their purses untouched. It was always the same story, almost, but never enough. Giovanni's only solace was his wife, Isabella. She was as luminous as the Florentine dawn, her presence warm enough to ward off the creeping despair that clung to their lives like mold. Yet, as Giovanni sank deeper into frustration, their little home became heavy with silence. Isabella, who had once hummed as she prepared their modest meals, now paced anxiously while Giovanni stared blankly at his canvases, his mind tangled in thoughts of failure. One evening, as rain tapped incessantly against the warped window panes, Giovanni sat hunched over yet another unfinished piece. The light of a single candle flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room. Exhausted and on the brink of desperation, he pressed the heel of his palm against his forehead, muttering to himself, "You seek more than you can give, Giovanni." The voice was soft, no louder than a breath. He shot up, eyes darting to find its source, but the room remained empty save for the flitting shadows. The whispers returned, not as words this time, but as an insistent hissing, like dry leaves on stone. Giovanni pressed his hands against his ears, but it did little to block out the sound. Panic rose in him as he saw the shadows seem to slither along the walls, dancing like wraiths. "Madness," he whispered, shaking his head. Yet the hiss faded only when Isabella appeared at the door, her eyes soft with worry. "Come to bed, Giovanni," she pleaded, but he turned away, consumed by a new fear. Over the next few days, the whispers would come and go, brushing the edges of his mind like a half-remembered tune. Giovanni became increasingly irritable, snapping at Isabella over trivialities, his frustration boiling over as the completed commissions refused to materialize. One fateful evening, as Giovanni grappled with yet another failure, the whispers surged, louder and more urgent than before. He whirled around, his eyes wild, and saw nothing but Isabella's frightened face, her hands clutched at her chest. "Giovanni, what is happening to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Stay away," he shouted, pushing her aside as he stormed to the window. The rain had returned, thrumming against the glass, a maddening echo of the whispers in his mind. He felt Isabella's hand on his arm, and something snapped inside him. He flung her hand away with more force than intended. Isabella staggered backward, her foot caught on the leg of a chair, and she fell. The sound of her skull striking the floor was a sickening thud that silenced the whispers and the rain alike. The room fell into a deep, unnatural quiet as Giovanni turned, eyes wide with horror, to see her lifeless body sprawled out, a small trickle of blood seeping from her temple. The candle's light flickered, illuminating her face in a soft, mournful glow. Giovanni dropped to his knees, choking on disbelief. But before he could cry out, the whispers returned, no longer teasing but commanding. "Paint." He resisted at first, repulsed by the idea, but as the hours dragged on, the whispers intensified, gnawing at him until he relented, numb and broken. With trembling hands, he propped Isabella up in her favorite chair, arranging her with a painter's precision. He chose his finest canvas, one that he had once reserved for the masterpiece he dreamed would secure his place among the greats. Each brushstroke was a prayer for forgiveness. Giovanni mixed his paints with an exactness bordering on madness, blending ochres and vermilions to mimic the flush of her skin, the jet black of her hair. He painted through the night, the whispers offering guidance, their dark counsel urging him on. Dawn arrived like a thief, creeping into the room with shafts of pale light. Giovanni stepped back to look at what he had created. The painting was unlike any of his previous work. Isabella's eyes seemed to follow him, glistening with a life that was both beautiful and terrible. The faintest hint of a smile played at her lips, so true to her memory that it brought tears to his eyes. But his elation was short-lived. The whispers, now triumphant, subsided into silence, replaced by a voice that was unmistakably hers. "Giovanni, what have you done?" Word spread quickly when a local patron stumbled upon the painting during a visit. He was so moved by the piece that he paid a small fortune for it and showcased it in his gallery. It was hailed as a work of stunning emotional depth, a testament to Giovanni's genius. Invitations flooded in, and soon his name was on the lips of Florence's elite. But success came at a steep price. Each night, as he lay in bed, the voice of Isabella haunted him. Sometimes it was a sob, other times it was laughter that would curdle his blood. And the whispers, those relentless shadows, returned with every glance at his newfound fame. The masterpiece became a symbol of Giovanni's fall from grace. He could not refuse the wealth and recognition it brought, but he refused every request to paint again. When patrons would visit, marveling at the soulful piece, Giovanni would stare past them, seeing only Isabella's eyes, pleading and unforgiving. As the months passed, Giovanni grew gaunt, his mind unraveling like a thread pulled too tight. He locked himself in his studio, refusing to leave. The once glorious painting now seemed a mockery of his lost love. Whispers taunted him with accusations, each hiss coiling around his heart like a serpent. Giovanni began to truly unravel. As weeks and months continued to pass, Giovanni slipped into drink and began wandering the stone streets of Florence in a drunken stupor. One night, he slipped into a tavern. It must have been nearing closing as all but one seat was vacant. Candlelight lit the stony walls, and Giovanni approached the lone man sitting in the corner. What began as a dark conversation between two struggling drunks slowly turned to something even darker in Giovanni's mind. The two men left the tavern together. "Come back to my studio," Giovanni slurred. That would be the last time that lone bar patron would ever be seen again, until he appeared on canvas in Giovanni's gallery. When the gallery attendees found him the next morning, Giovanni was slumped against his easel, his eyes wide and unseeing, a smile of both terror and relief on his lips. The people attending were in awe of the detail and emotion laid out on Giovanni's newest canvas. It just seemed so real and raw. This would be the beginning of a long, lucrative, and infamous career. As the last patron left the gallery for the evening, a crumpled piece of parchment blew in through the door. It was a newsprint from earlier that day that read, "Missing man found dead in alley." A crooked grin slowly appeared on Giovanni's face as he knew exactly where to find any future inspiration. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. If you have an idea for a short, scary story, leave it in the comments below. See you at the next campfire.